Hi, I'm Vinny, and I still can't sleep if the closet door is open.
And I'm Kim, and walls of synchronized clocks are totally creepy. And this is the Right Mind Podcast. This episode of the Right Mind Podcast is brought to you by Professor Screw Eye's Brain Drain Cereal. Ignorance is bliss, now part of a balanced breakfast.
Now fortified with extra calcium. These statements not evaluated by the FDA.
It's that time of year again when ghosts and goblins by the score ring the bell on your front door.
That's right, it is Halloween. So, in honor of the creepy holiday, we are going to be discussing creepy themes and atmospheres.
Specifically, children's media.
So, why children's media instead of horror? Well, if you were like me as a kid, you probably at some point went to your elementary school library and picked up a copy of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And for some reason, you opened that book, saw the picture of the giant rotting clown head that's bigger than a barn, and didn't burst into tears and vomit. Most people who I know who are familiar with those stories are creeped out by these pictures to this day. Just because it's for children doesn't mean it can't be creepy.
Sometimes even more so, because children's media, you have to look beyond traditionally what it goes into horror work. You really can't fill up a child's book or movie with tons of gore, for instance. And your jump scares, while you can still have them, tend to be a little bit more tame.
Yes, rather than your slasher films, which relies in the, oh god, the serial killer is right behind you, and lots of severed body parts and blood everywhere. Children's movies are still trying to get that G or maybe PG rating. Now, we all laugh about things like the PG-13 movie that clearly shows a gun being fired at a man and then he hits the ground, and because they didn't show him get shot, it doesn't count as gore. But remember, kids' movies have been doing this for a lot longer.
Now, before we go into any specifics of movies, once again, as part of the Right Mind, we'll be discussing a lot of elements of these movies, and therefore plenty of spoilers will abound.
We will also try to see if we can track down some clips in case we discuss something that you aren't familiar with. Perhaps you can click a link and refamiliarize yourself or see it for the first time if you're curious. Keep in mind, too, these are tips and tricks and observations that don't just apply to when you're writing specifically something scary or presenting a horror film or anything like that. Creepy atmospheres and such can fit into any sort of genre, really. And I think that's part of why kids' movies are so good to look at, because you're probably not going to use your Friday the 13th 27 type of horror in a drama.
In fact, one part that's always gotten me is when the horror, the creepiness is very unexpected. It's in a game or a movie in which you completely didn't see this horrible, disturbing aspect coming.
When we say the unexpected, we aren't talking about your jump scares, which frankly often are very expected, but rather horror and fear in films, games, books where you were not expecting there to be anything scary. One example that really got me as a kid was Super Mario 64. Obviously, Super Mario is very much a family-friendly title. We all played it from the time we were... well, I was playing it, I think, before I learned to talk. I had an older brother. But the Big Boo's Haunt stage, I could not, as a 10-year-old, stand the sound of the merry-go-round. Everything about that music just set my skin crawling the moment it started playing. And I would make my big brother play that stage for me because I would just want to run screaming from the room.
I remember a scene in Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. You know, a little bit more action, a little bit more, Zelda.
Still very kid-friendly for the most part.
Still very kid-friendly. And even the scene is kind of kid-friendly, but there was just something haunted about the kid in the haunted grove. The one that you ultimately get the flute from. You would enter this grove, and you would hear this creepy flute music. It's presented as happy because he's playing a flute surrounded by animals, But when you came close, he would vanish.
Yes, and when you actually encounter him in the Dark World, and you retrieve his flute and play it for him the last time, he completes his slow, painful transformation into a tree. And while not exactly outright horror, it's very unsettling. And even though in classic SNES fashion, everything is better by the end of the game, you have fixed everything, it's still kind of a scene that I think sticks with a lot of kids, because it's so jarring to have that sort of creepiness, that eeriness, in an otherwise very high-adventure, almost swashbuckling type game. Similarly, in Ocarina of Time, I was always creeped out by the re-dead screams, specifically when you were a child Link, because it wasn't just that the re-deads would scream, it's that Link would get scared, and he would freeze. And for a moment, you would be paralyzed with fear. Your character on the screen would not move as they crept towards you. And in similar fashion, Dead Hand, that large, white, bloody hand, I guess, well, I don't know if it's actually supposed to be blood, but it has red fingertips, that reaches out of the ground and grabs you and holds you in place while this terrible thing creeps towards you. That paralysis and that clear representation of fear in a game that's not scary just made it more jarring.
As far as movies go, the biggest example to me of the unexpected is We're Back, a Dinosaur Story. The movie itself is about what you expect. It is a silly little fun movie with dinosaurs. My little brother watched it. It's goofy, it's colorful, it's cheerful, with one exception.
Holy crap, Professor Screw Eyes and his creepy, creepy circus. Honestly, I don't really like the movie We're Back that much.
It's pretty mediocre at best.
Yes, it's the musical numbers are cheesy and so on and so forth, but that circus, I will sit down and watch any scene with Professor Screw Eyes and his creepy circus.
Interestingly, they actually cut out his origin story, which makes him even creepier, because, well, you know, too scary.
He was already deemed too scary for the movie. In his origins, he had been attacked by crows as a child, and they plucked out one of his eyes.
It sets up one of the most haunting villain deaths ever.
Yes, in the end, as everyone abandons him to his fears, the crows swoop in and tear him apart. Now, they don't show that, because Professor Screw Eyes is a particularly good example of utilizing basically all the tricks of good, still family-acceptable horror. It shows less, it's unexpected, it twists around things that you normally think of as happy, such as a circus. And everything about the sounds in that last scene, and many scenes with him, causes kind of this dissonance and discord. The sound as the crows swoop in, just the flapping of the wings, and the sound of his lone screw-eye dropping to the ground.
Clinking on... just... clink.
It's unsettling.
All in complete silence. The music, the cheerful music that accompanied the rest of the movie, is gone.
Yeah, again, I say he's pulled apart by crows, but one of the big things is children's media tends to show less. And obviously, this is because you can't show someone being pulled apart by crows, but we kind of have this mistaken idea that by showing less, things are less horrifying, less jarring. You know, we're protecting our kids. When I was a small child, my family decided to rent Raiders of the Lost Ark. And during the face-melting scene, my parents worried it would be too scary for me, so they wouldn't let me watch. So I had to sit there and listen to people's faces melt off. Thanks, Mom and Dad, I had way more nightmares than I ever would have, having just watched that scene. I was an adult before I saw that scene. It really isn't that scary, but as a kid, what was happening in my mind was so terrible.
But yes, Disney actually does this a lot with their villain deaths. The ones that come to mind are Clayton from the end of Tarzan, who hung himself violently on vines. Scar, who is eaten alive, torn to pieces by hyenas, and the evil queen from Snow White, who got smushed.
Yes, it doesn't ever actually show these things happen. You just see the setup, the villain look horrified or whatever, and then the cutaway. But there's no illusion about what happened. And in a lot of ways, that not seeing it makes it more powerful. Now, I'm not saying that these things are necessarily bad for children. I'm personally not of the opinion that kids getting scared occasionally is bad for them. But I am saying that in a lot of ways, it's kind of what makes it scarier. A lot of horror writers will tell you that what you conjure in your mind, your personal horror, is far worse than anything they can show you.
So what you should do is you set up the hooks. You set up their mind to be ripe for coming up with, to fill in the blanks themselves.
Some other great examples. Coraline. Both the book and the movie. I'm a huge fan of Neil Gaiman, and honestly, I don't know if I would want to meet him and have coffee. I'm not sure I could resist the urge to decapitate him and try to absorb his powers like the Highlander. But Coraline does very well with the other mother and her scary button eyes, which is that kind of twisted perversion and also that dissonance and discord, that disconnect. But also, you get this impression with the other mother that she does something terrible, but you don't really see it. You just see the vacant smiles of everyone else in the other world, and the way that they panic when the other mother is displeased, or they'll think she'll find something out, and they leave it to your imagination to imagine what it is that she does. Similarly, one of the inspirations for the book was a short story called The New Mother. The New Mother is about children who are misbehaving, and their mother warns them that if they don't behave, they're going to get a new mother with glass eyes and a wooden tail. And the very last line of the story is just that they see glass eyes glinting in the dark and hear the thump of a wooden tail. And that's it. You don't know what happens after that, and that is far, far more frightening than anything they could have come up with that the other mother did.
Just because you show less doesn't mean you kind of sidestep it all. After all, The Secret of NIMH was very scary. They show you very, very scary imagery. That cat has started wars.
He's also ended them.
And the owl who wears spiderwebs as a cape. There's a lot of very scary imagery in Secret of NIMH. However, one of the points is NIMH itself. They show a little bit of the effects.
You know the mice were experimented on, but they don't really get into what exactly happened. And in a lot of ways, just those few flashes of images of, injections and the scary lab and things like that is more than enough for a young mind to really freak out watching that movie. I'm pretty sure The Secret of NIMH was just about the scariest movie to me as a kid.
All you know, aside from those flashes, are that and the fact that the mice would rather die than go back. Pretty horrible.
Another really terrifying movie, and this movie actually received mixed reviews primarily because it was deemed too scary for children, was Return to Oz. Now, you start at the beginning of Return to Oz with Dorothy is taken to an asylum to receive electroshock therapy because of these dreams she's still having about Oz. And you never actually see the shock therapy. The doctor has this scary sparking machine. They're strapping her down to a table, and then the power goes out, and someone comes to rescue her. And as they're fleeing, they hear these terrible thumping noises and shouts and just all these eerie sounds. And Dorothy asks what that is. And the girl tells her that it's the other patients that he keeps in the basements. It's the ones he ruined. You never see what happened to these people. But you can imagine that whatever it is, it must be really, really awful. Now, in contrast, and there's a lot of scary going on in Return to Oz, when Dorothy first encounters the Wheelers, there are these hunched over, literally like wheels on their hands and feet, really creepy guys. But they were kind of worried that they were too scary, so they started showing their faces and making them kind of goofy and slapstick, and while they're still threatening to, like, pull people apart and all these terrible things, all the horror of them is gone. I was kind of disappointed that they went that route, because, well, I loved being scared as a kid, but it goes to show you that sometimes when you do show things, it wasn't just that they made them goofy, but just the fact that they suddenly had human faces made them less scary. So, moving on to perversion. And this is another thing that children's media does a lot. You take things where you expect it to be good, to be happy, and then you taint it in some way. So, again, with Professor Screw Eyes and his creepy circus.
Circuses are supposed to be happy places.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there who are afraid of clowns. But moving on beyond just your typical, oh, clowns, merry-go-rounds. Just even things like in An American Tail. Again, there's plenty of scary going on in An American Tail. It's about a Russian mouse family fleeing cats that are trying to eat them for being, I think, Jewish mice. But the scariest scene to me as a kid was the giant mouse of Minsk. And the thing is, part of what made it so creepy is that the heroes are the ones doing it. They want to frighten the cats, so they create this horrible monstrosity of a sparking beast mouse with this very ramshackle body and head and, like, fiery eyes that moves in this very disconnected, disjointed way. And, like, everything about the mouse is already scary. But just the fact that this is also the heroic solution is also really jarring, in a way. I guess it's a very Russian solution to a very Russian problem. But yeah, like, I loved that movie as a kid, and I didn't feel that the solution made the protagonist evil, but it was really shocking to me, because you would normally expect that kind of fear to come from the villain. Similarly, with Coraline, there's a lot of twists. The other world is supposed to be her ideal reality. A world where her mom cooks good food, and her dad is happy, and plays piano, and sings her songs all the time, where her friend is less annoying, but everything about it has become twisted. Like, everything, just those button eyes, kind of already cue you in that something is just wrong. But everything about the backdrop, all this disconnect, is just emphasized by how happy this world's supposed to be, with its mouse circus, and its acrobats, and all its music, and this ideal family has all been corrupted. And that really adds to that kind of hair-on-end effect.
Something related, another technique that's related to perversion, but we feel like is different enough, is having dissonance or discord. Having something that just seems wrong. It's out of place. It's not a part of what you expect or what you...
It's not a part of what you expect. It's not a part of what feels natural. It's that, well, it's kind of the whole Jaws effect, where having those two contrasting notes play over and over again, something about it just hits you the wrong way and the right way to set you on edge. I would say, like, a lot of claymation. Most claymation kids films, I've noticed, tend to go for the creepy a whole lot. That's your Nightmare Before Christmas, your... I guess Coraline is claymation, isn't it? Or is it...
It's done in a style.
Yeah, it's stop motion. Claymation and stop motion. So, yeah, your Nightmare Before Christmas, Coraline, James and the Giant Peach.
Claymation has a tendency to be very stuttering in its movements, and that is something that is very, very unsettling to the human eye.
People don't like jerky motions. I mean, we like the results when what we're looking for is that unsettled kind of chill, but yeah, everything about it, I think it kind of strikes that sort of uncanny valley chord with you.
Another scene which I feel has a lot of discord and dissonance in it is Charlie's death in All Dogs Go to Heaven. The second one.
The second time he dies.
The one where after he pushes the girl to safety, he's trying to desperately grab his pocket watch at the bottom of a burning barge.
And if the watch stops, he will die. And just that tick of the pocket watch, in contrast with all the other sounds.
In contrast with the sound, in contrast with the music, in contrast with notes that are playing.
Sound is popular in Dissonance and Discord, because having a rhythmic or slightly off rhythmic sound to everything else kind of upsets our desire for patterns. And yes, it's horrific enough that he's drowning at the bottom of a burning barge, but the sound design and the way everything slows down and everything throughout it really adds to that atmosphere. But it's not just sounds, you can also have it in such things as, well, basically your themes. Like, again, going back to Return to Oz, your Princess Mombi, who's this very beautiful princess that Dorothy encounters, and she knows she's a monster already. But when she gets there, she's a woman who switches her heads, and is very cordial and very frank as she tells Dorothy that she'll never be pretty, but there will be a certain something about her face, and proceeds to lock her up so that she can take her head later. It's not just the idea that she's switching heads, but also just that contrast, that disconnect from the casual way that she collects these heads, switches them around. There's nothing inherently horrific about the heads themselves, but it's just that switching between them, the fact that they sit there on a shelf and are living heads. It's not natural.
And yet it's treated as if it were. It was just every day. Just go and take a different head.
No, it's Tuesday. I think I'll wear this head today. And another really big example, and this actually really frightened the actors as well, because no one actually knew what was going to happen. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And this is dissonance, but also that unexpected. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, when Willy Wonka is on the boat going through the tunnel.
They had no idea what was going on. These lights were flashing, the scary images were playing. But for the actors, it was a lot of lights and Gene Wilder, who seemed to have gone off the deep end.
Yes, there are a lot of scenes, if you research Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where you find out that they didn't tell anyone else what Gene Wilder was going to be doing. So when people react in shock and horror, that's pretty genuine, actually.
That slow chant of madness that he came up with, that was part of his script and lines. Nobody told them that he was going to be chanting. Nobody told them that he was going to go crazy. And a few people actually did go, oh dear.
Yes, and it's everything about the sing-song, distracted, very out-of-it way that he does it. I can't say that I was really terrified of Willy Wonka as a kid, though I know some people who were. Like, they legitimately could not watch that movie as children because Gene Wilder was so scary. But I can remember that scene fascinating me because it was uncomfortable listening to the way he just carried on like a mad person.
And it really did put forth that the character was a little mad. But that was okay. He's mad. That's just what he does.
Until he throws you down a chocolate pipe. I guess he doesn't throw anyone down a chocolate pipe, but
he shoots them up a chocolate pipe.
Yes. He mostly sits back and lets you destroy yourself. Better, right?
Of course. It's not murder if you steal fizzy lifting drinks and get shredded by a fan. And that brings us to this episode's Villain Spotlight.
So, on each episode, we've decided that we would like to bring up a villain that is notable in some way. Probably, usually, this will be for good things, though, kind of like the Time Person of the Year, it can also be for notoriety for things that were done badly. So, who is our villain spotlight for this week?
For Halloween?
Surprise! It's Christopher Lloyd, in the role of Judge Doom.
Christopher Lloyd was a lot in our childhood, wasn't he?
Yeah, actually, he wore so many masks in so many different disguises, costumes, I guess, that I didn't realize until I was well into adulthood how many films I watched as a kid where he was a major character.
Right. The thing with Judge Doom is, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the horrific aspects of him because it's Halloween and all, but he embodies a lot of horror in what is normally a very happy, cheerful movie. It's Toontown. Toons are happy. They blow themselves up. Everything is hunky-dory.
Part of the thing about Who Framed Roger Rabbit in general, to a lot of people, this movie was really scary for kids. And it is, again, all that unexpected and that dissonance and discord, because you've mixed happy cartoons with film noir. And that actually is a huge part of the parody. Like, there were lines as a kid that the actors delivered with straight faces that sounded really serious to me at the time, but when I listened to them as an adult, I realized that it's hilarious when the love interest gets choked up about Eddie Valiant's brother being killed by a piano falling on his head.
Remember, Toons are supposed to be cheerful and happy and just great to be around. They may be a little silly, but in the end, Toons are cool. Except Judge Doom. And after all, how can you forget the way he's introduced? You see Judge Doom, there's a little bit of dialogue, a little bit of his origin, and he immediately destroys your childhood by executing a little shoe. A little shoe who has done absolutely nothing. He picks him up and slowly melts him face first into dip.
Yes, and the entire time, it's just this sizzling, this shrieking, this trembling, and everyone around him looks around and looks disturbed, but no one steps in and tries to stop him.
It's a very horrific scene, and contrast to the rest of the movie, it was an unexpected moment of, did that just happen? Did this cartoon shoe just melt to death?
Oh yeah. But there's a lot of, again, that disconnect throughout the movie. Everything about Judge Doom, really. The way he talks is very unsettling. He never sounds quite there. He always sounds mad. But not like raving, cackling mad.
Not until after.
Not until the end, yeah. But then when you do get to the climax and he reveals that he was the Toon who killed Eddie Valiant's brother, his voice changes into its natural high shriekiness, and again, it's hitting all those points, like all those notes that just do not sit well with you.
The dissonance and discord of his voice, and just the way he looks, the way they blended together, they animated his eyes, but not anything else.
The mix of Christopher Lloyd and rubber mask and cartoon effects, that none of them go right together.
It transforms him into this really scary villain.
And even when he's being run over by a steamroller towards the end, which should be a very cartoony, not at all upsetting death, it's extremely disturbing.
After all, he keeps kind of yelling, screaming, making noises as he's being flattened. And yeah, no, that's pretty scary.
I have actually read a lot of things online where people have said that their parents had to take them out of the theater during certain scenes with Judge Doom, especially the climax, because they just couldn't stand it as kids. And I remember watching it. I think we owned this movie basically my entire life. It was one of the first films I owned on VHS. And I watched it over and over and over. And it frightened me. But I still kept watching it.
So yes, Judge Doom, scary villain. Really, just think about it and appreciate him.
So, in closing, we've talked about a lot of children's movies that deal with primarily scary, negative emotions. There's a lot of controversy these days about whether or not children's movies should be scary. I'm of the opinion that, well, it's up to parents to decide whether or not their kids can watch something. I actually like for kids' movies to be scary from time to time. To me, movies and books and things like that give kids a safe place to experience a wide range of emotions and learn and not have to deal with real-world consequences of it. To me, I would much rather a kid be scared for the first time watching a children's movie than be scared for the first time having to deal with an actual emergency.
Yeah, so we appreciate it. All joking about therapy bills aside, we think we came out relatively okay. Relatively. So, obviously, we can't cover every scary work, every scary movie, game, book that's out there. We probably didn't even cover the best ones. We just covered what came to mind at the moment.
So, we would like to invite you, if you're listening, if you have a scary scene, movie clip, a line from a book, image, whatever, from your childhood, a children-focused sort of horror that still gets you, or that gave you nightmares as a kid, let us know. I always love to collect and catalog these things.
And probably watch it herself. Thanks for listening. This is The Right Mind.